Welcome. Thank you for choosing to watch today's program. My name is Felicity Ezewike. You've most probably heard about Israel's recognition of Somaliland as an independent state. If not, let's quickly bring you up to speed and why you should have interest. On December 26, 2025, Israel became the first country and UN member state to officially recognize the Republic of Somaliland as a sovereign and independent state. Somaliland is a self-declared independent state in the Horn of Africa. It declared independence from Somalia in 1991 after a brutal civil war. Despite its functional government and institutions, Somaliland hasn't received widespread international recognition, with many countries supporting Somalia's territorial integrity instead. Now, Israel's recognition of Somaliland has been seen as a provocative move, with many African and Arab countries condemning it as a threat to Somalia's sovereignty. The African Union and the Arab League have both expressed strong opposition, citing concerns about the implications for regional stability and the potential for separatist movements across Africa. What really is Israel's endgame, knowing how polarizing their decision would be? And importantly, what does it mean for the region? To help push better understanding of the issues at stake, we invited lecturer, School of Political Science, Government and International Affairs from Tel Aviv University, Dr. Emmanuel Navon. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Also in this conversation, a researcher and political analyst, Horn of Africa, Gulf of Aden and Red Sea, Abdifatah Hassan-Mohamed is joining us from Somaliland. In this conversation as well, we have Head African Governance and Diplomacy Program and the Africa-Russia Project at the South African Institute of International Affairs, Steven Gruzd, joins us from Johannesburg. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us your time. Abdifatah, let me start with you. But before I start the question, it's important that I say some of my questions were really inspired by the submission of a PhD fellow at the Center for Constitutional Democracy, Indiana University, on the subject matter, and that's Alemayehu Wild Mariam. We need to acknowledge people who give us inspiration to ask the right questions. So, gentlemen, let's get to it. Abdifatah, what really is Israel's end game, knowing how polarizing this decision would be, not just for Africa, but globally? Abdifatah, if you can hear me. Abdifatah, can you hear me, please? Okay, let's go to Emmanuel.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, take on the question then.
Well, the question was, what is Israel trying to achieve? And Israel is finally behaving like the great power it has become, like the Middle East biggest power, according to many international agencies, the 10th most important power in the world. And Israel is, first of all, recognizing a country that is a key partner in a very unstable region. When Somalia claims that this recognition is going to bring instability in the region, one doesn't know if one should laugh or cry, because Somalia is a failed state whose only export are pirates and is a main source of instability in the region. Somaliland, on the other hand, is a stable country that is a key partner for Israel to face the Houthi terrorist movement in Yemen, which has been disturbing international trade and stability. Moreover, Israel is also exposing the hypocrisy and double standards of the UN and of major powers that refuse to recognize Somaliland, even though it meets all the requirements of international law to be recognized as a sovereign country. It was, in fact, independent in 1960 as British Somaliland, distinct from the Italian one. They decided later on to merge and then decided to separate. So it's perfectly legal. They had a referendum in 1991, and they decided to be independent. They meet all the requirements of international law. There is no reason in terms of legality not to recognize Somaliland. And yet, most of the countries that refused to recognize Somaliland did recognize a so-called Palestinian state, which does not mean any of the requirements of international law, that has been using terrorism, and that undermines Israel's territorial integrity and security. So I think what Israel is achieving is establishing a partnership with a key partner against terrorist sources in the region, against the destabilizing policies of Iran and its proxies and of Somalia, and B, as I said, exposing the sheer hypocrisy and double standards of the UN and the international community when it comes to international law and a recognition of sovereignty.
Okay, Abdifatah, if you can hear me now, did you listen to Emmanuel's submission? Or, I mean, on one hand, he believes Somaliland is more stable than even Somalia, and, you know, the lack of recognition signaling the hypocrisy in some of our leanings.
Yeah, I think you hear me very well.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I agree with Emmanuel there. Somaliland have really going on about the last 30 years or last 35 years. But what is the most issue about how this strategic move taken by Israel to recognize Somaliland was really was the ice breaking movement about how really going on in this relation is. So the first move was Israel was trying to really get a new coalition from it is beyond boundaries. The former countries that have really relations with.
Okay, I think we're having if you can hear me, just go ahead. Go ahead. We're listening to you.
No, there's some problems with my.
Okay, we'll come back to you then. We'll come back to you, Steven. I mean, let's not harp on the part about the hypocrisy, but let's look at really what is in this. How does Somaliland's location along the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea contribute to its strategic importance to be so recognized?
Yes, I mean, I think this is all about geography and geopolitics. Israel is talking perhaps about a military base in Somaliland, which would give it much easier access to deal with the Houthis in Yemen. The Red Sea is a critical waterway for goods going from the Mediterranean through to the Indian Ocean, and Somaliland is right there. And it has demonstrated that it can be a state even without recognition for the last 35 years. It's held elections with no outside support, and they've been largely seen as free and fair. So I think Israel is also looking for friends. It's looking to extend the Abraham Accords, which were signed with countries like Morocco and the United Arab Emirates and Sudan. At the end of the first Trump presidency, Trump has said that he wants to expand that, so does Israel. The big prize, of course, would be Saudi Arabia, but that doesn't look likely at the very moment. But it's interesting, you know, because Israel is the only country to have recognized Somaliland to date. So it hasn't started a trend, or it hasn't yet started a trend. And as your first guest said, it did unleash condemnation from countries all around the world. I think the African Union and the Arab League and the OIC are scared of the precedent that this might set, that countries would unravel, countries would be subject to separatist movements in a much more serious way. And the borders, right back in the 1960s, they said, we're going to stick with the colonial borders. It's going to be too difficult, too traumatic, too violent to redraw the boundaries of our continent. And so even though many of them don't make sense, many of them cut communities in half, cut regions in half, the feeling is that it would just be a Pandora's box and unleash forces that would completely destabilize the whole continent.
Emmanuel, I'll come to you before I can go to Abdifatah again and go back to your comments about how stable Somaliland is. What then are the implications of this recognition for Somalia's not just sovereignty, but territorial integrity?
Well, this whole idea of territorial integrity barely applies to Somalia. As I said, Somalia has become a failed state. It is a failed state that endangers the regional security.
I'm sorry to interject. If it is a failed state, why then are bodies like the African Union and Arab League seeming to support them more than this separatist movement? As Steven rightly pointed out, the fear of the union that separatist movements like this could inspire moves that cannot be managed.
Well, as I said, there's no contradiction between Somalia being a failed state and enjoying the support of the African Union, as well as major powers such as China and Russia. Yes, they are supporting a failed state because they fear the phenomenon of separatist movement. They fear a domino effect in Africa because there are other separatist movements. So they basically give preference to their own political calculations than to the interest of the region and to the cause of justice and of international law. So the fact that Somalia is a failed state and is basically an exporter of pirates in the Gulf of Aden and the South Red Sea is unfortunately not the major concern of the African Union and of the Arab League. They're more concerned by precedents and less by justice, by international law, and by security in the Gulf of Aden and in the southern Red Sea.
Okay, I'm going to ask this question from a purely naive point of view. If Somalia is a failed state, Somaliland is connected to it, and the AU is saying would rather stay with Somalia, make it make sense. A failed state getting recognition, and one that is said to be trying to be, having been a splinter group, is, out again with Israel supporting them.
First of all, you're right, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for those countries not to recognize Somaliland. As I explained before, there's a principle in international law, it's called uti possidetis juris, and it means that a country should be able to inherit the borders of the previous sovereign of colonial powers. This is what Somaliland did in 1960. It was a separate entity under the British Empire, and then there was the Italian Somaliland. They became separately independent in 1960. They decided later on to merge, right? But Somalia became a failed state and it lost any authority on Somaliland. Somaliland, on the other hand, became a functioning country with democratic elections, and it is entitled to separate. It had a referendum to separate from this dysfunctioning country which Somalia has become. I mean, if the Quebecois or the Scots had won the majority in their respective referenda for independence, this would have been recognized by the international community. There was a referendum in Somaliland to separate. On the other hand, by the way, there never was a referendum for this union in 1960 between British and Italian Somaliland. So, as I said, this refusal of many countries, of most countries, to recognize Somaliland is purely out of cynical political calculations, and it has nothing to do with the merits of the case of Somaliland.
Okay, nothing to do with merits. I still have questions for you, but let's go to Abdifatah. Hopefully your network will be much better. I'd like you to make your opening statements and response to some of the comments that have been made, and then I can put a question to you.
Sure.
All right, let's see if we can fix that. We're on a very short break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Just stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Abdifatah, if you can hear me, I wanted you to complete your opening thoughts, and then I will ask you a question since the network was interrupting. Okay, I guess we'll stick with Dr. Emmanuel, Navon, and Steven Gruzd, because the network from Abdifatah's side is not working at all. Steven, correct me if I'm wrong, but the impression here that I've gleaned from both of you is that this may not have a lot to do with the economic side of things, the Red Sea and all that comes with it. Is that your view, really, or I'm just assuming?
There are economic reasons. We've heard of certain companies that have expressed their desire to invest in Somaliland. As previous speakers have said, this is a major waterway where billions of dollars of goods move up and down. It's very strategic. It's on a naval choke point. It's critical, and I think if Israel feels that it is advantageous to interact with Somaliland, to recognize Somaliland, and to do business with Somaliland, it will be very grateful to do so. So I think a lot of the commerce is in the area, not necessarily at the moment, but there are plans for certain high-tech companies to invest quite heavily in Somaliland in the next coming days. I just wanted to make the point that, how rare it is for African countries to successfully secede from a bigger country. So there've only been 2 examples in the whole history of the continent, and those are Eritrea and South Sudan. And Eritrea seceded because it had been on the winning side of a civil war in Ethiopia, and it had permission, basically, from Addis Ababa to do so. And in Sudan, after many, many, many decades of war, there was finally a referendum where the South Sudanese said that they wanted to be independent. So in both cases, the country that was these new countries were moving out of, however grudgingly accepted that. This is a very different case because Somalia does not want to let Somaliland go.
Emmanuel, some have argued that the recognition makes sense because Israel is choosing to embed itself within an Emirati-centered political economy of the Red Sea. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, condemned Israel's decision on the grounds that it entrenched unilateral secession and violates international law. In doing so, that it aligned itself with the African Union's position while asserting independent leadership in the Red Sea arena. On the surface, it looks like they are at cross purposes. Are they really, or this is just politics?
It is just politics, and of course, Saudi Arabia is wrong when it claims that Israel's recognition goes against international law. This is absolutely not the case, as I've explained before. If we're talking about international law, which I have few doubts that Saudi Arabia actually cares about, international law, in terms of international law, as I said, Somaliland has a very, very strong case, probably the strongest case today of claim to independence and recognition in the world of secessionist movement. And again, you said it yourself, Israel has a partnership with the United Arab Emirates in general, but in the Somaliland in particular. And it's really too bad that Saudi Arabia, instead of fully joining the Abraham Accords and expanding this regional cooperation between the region's most stable and successful countries, such as Israel and the UAE, has decided to use this this rhetoric of populism and trying to probably for itself have a different role in the Middle East. But that is very regrettable. I would say that Saudi Arabia is coming up with those statements instead of joining the Abraham Accords and contributing to the stability in the region. I mean, Saudi Arabia for years has been bombing the Houthis in Yemen unsuccessfully, by the way. It should be thankful to Israel for finally knocking down this terrorist organization and for building a partnership with Somaliland to fight those terrorist organizations supported by Iran, which is also a rival of Saudi Arabia, and not only of Israel.
Steven, over the last decade, the Red Sea, which links the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, has become the front line of a new multipolar order. The region now hosts the highest concentration of foreign military bases on Earth. It also sits astride critical global trade routes. What's the impact of Israel's recognition on an already fragile situation?
In the long run, or in the short run, it's going to make much difference. What we have not seen is more countries joining Israel. It's isolated. Now, some might say, well, given Israel's international image coming out of the war in Gaza, it put the kiss of death on Somaliland by recognizing it. I don't think that's true, but countries have reacted very harshly to Israel's decision to recognize Somaliland. And yes, this is a critical area of the globe. There has been, as your first speaker, Emmanuel, was saying, extensive terrorism and hijacking of ships and piracy in the Red Sea. And Somalia has not been able to rein that in. And you have the major powers a few years ago had to mount an operation, including the US, including China, to ensure the safety of shipping. This is a critical area. We are in a very geopolitical world where politics and geography come together, and it seems like we might be going back to the 18th century or the 19th century when countries had spheres of influence. That seems to be one of the interpretations of Donald Trump's actions in Venezuela, talking about Greenland, Mexico, Cuba. These are all in his hemisphere. Is this the new world? I saw even today Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said, well, you know, if America wants Greenland and it's so important to its sovereignty, well, it's the same with us in Ukraine. It's absolutely vital. So I don't think a good precedent is being set. And yes, this is one of the central points of geodiplomacy, geopolitics in this very fractured and changing world that we live in.
Emmanuel, in Israel's recognition announcement, Benjamin Netanyahu explicitly situated Somaliland within the logic of the Abraham Accords. I think you mentioned it earlier, either you or Steven. What can you tell us about this accord? How the Somaliland's recognition affected Israel's relations with the Arab countries?
The Abraham Accords, which basically refer to the peace agreements and normalization of August 2020 between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and later on with Morocco, basically officialized the relation between Israel and those Arab countries that share a shared concern vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic of Iran's aggression and export of violence and instability in the region. And it's also countries that understand that the economic future of the region lies in technological innovation, of which Israel is a master. So Israel is the most reliable partner for successful countries in the region who want to protect themselves from Iranian aggression, or I would say the aggression of the Islamic Republic, and want to assure their long-term growth thanks to technological innovation, and understand that relying only on oil export is not enough. So these agreements have been expanded, will be continue to be expanded. They've been expanded also to South Sudan, to Kazakhstan, and now with Somaliland. Again, any country in the wider Middle East and North Africa that wants economic growth, cooperation, scientific innovation, and a reliable partner against the aggression of the Islamic Republic naturally sees in Israel the most reliable and powerful partner of the region. And that is the main meaning of the Abraham Accords. As we're speaking, Morocco has started using Israel's anti-missile technology to protect itself from Algeria, which is itself aligned with Iran. So Israel is, as I said, a very sought-after partner in that region. And I think adding Somaliland to those Abraham Accords is a welcome move. And I think there are also more countries and more candidates on the list.
I understand we have Abdifatah again. Let's see if we can work with his audio so he can contribute to this conversation. Abdifatah, if you can hear me, kindly acknowledge. Okay, so we stick with Steven. Talk to us about the potential consequences for Somaliland's relations with other African countries, many of whom are yet to recognize them.
Or yet to recognize it. As we said, Israel is the only country in the world that recognizes Somaliland. It obviously has relations with its neighbors, and those are going to continue. But Somalia has reacted harshly and does not want to lose about 50% of its territory were it to grant independence to Somaliland. The Horn of Africa is a very volatile region. You have Yemen just over the Red Sea. You have Somalia itself, which is in a chaotic state and it has been a failed state for 35 years. You have Ethiopia, a rising giant. You have Djibouti, a very important country because it hosts a number of military bases, including for the French, the United States, and China. You have Russia that's very keen to get a port on the Red Sea and has coveted that for many, many years. Has not succeeded yet, but there's always talk that it may be acquiring a Red Sea port. In Somaliland, we have the harbour of Hargeisa, which has been extensively renovated and modernized by DP World, coming out of Dubai. So obviously the region is important. We also have tensions between Ethiopia and Egypt over the grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that has been built on the Nile, and that's created tension. So it is also a volatile region. It's close to Sudan, which has been having civil war for the last 3 or 4 years. South Sudan is also a very unstable state. So it's not in a good neighborhood. And I suppose it will see this opportunity to work closely with Israel as a real opportunity for the country.
Emmanuel, how does Israel's recognition compare to other recognition cases? You mentioned Palestine earlier. Could you expand on that?
Palestine does not meet any of the requirements of international law. There's not a single and recognized government. There are no recognized borders. Even the population is separated into 2 different territories. It is a gesture of political decision. It has nothing to do with international law. The very concept of a Palestinian people was basically invented by Soviet propaganda after the Six-Day War. The PLO was created in 1964, 3 years before the Six-Day War, and therefore the ultimate purpose of this so-called Palestinian state was always to continue the struggle against Israel, and the modus operandi of the PLO always has been terrorism. And yet, despite of all this, there's a widespread recognition of this so-called state, which, by the way, declared its independence. The PLO declared independence in 1988 without defining its own borders, because it considers that all of the historical Palestine created by the League of Nations in 1922 should be an Arab state without any room for the state of Israel. And that is the meaning of PLO, which is Palestine Liberation Organization. It's not called West Bank and Gaza Strip Organization. So, and on the other hand, you have Somaliland, which is a real country, a real people, which declared already its independence from Britain in 1960, has a recognized government, a territory, a population, meets all the requirements of the Montevideo Convention about state recognition and international law, and there you don't have recognition. So as I said before, international law is actually an excuse for politics. Countries make their decisions basically based on politics, and then they use international law as an excuse. But that is completely disingenuous. And I think that what Israel's recognition did is really to expose this double standard and this, as I said before, hypocrisy. And I do believe and hope that more countries will follow Israel's lead.
But why now? Why now? Somaliland has been struggling for recognition for decades. Why now? Why is Israel deciding that, okay, we are going to do this?
Because we just emerged from a war, and we need to understand that after over 2 years of war against Iran's proxies in the region, it is about time to change the rules of the game in the region and to strengthen the countries that contribute to stability and the struggle against the axis of aggression of the Islamic Republic. And why now? Because Israel finally knocked down the web of aggression led by Tehran, and it is about time to turn the situation around and to seize every diplomatic opportunity, and that is what Israel did.
Steven, let's look at other external actors like the US, China, Russia. How does it affect their role in the Horn of Africa?
The exception of Russia, as I've said, Djibouti hosts major international army bases, military bases for the US, for China, for France, and there's some others. I mean, what we're seeing is in Africa generally a much more complex playing field. So whereas maybe it was previously the former colonial powers, you have China. You have, in a big way, I mean, massive investment in the continent. You have countries like Turkey. You have countries like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. You have India. To a lesser extent, you have Brazil. You have Iran itself and Israel. And Israel offers a lot of technological solutions to these countries. It's a leader in high-tech agriculture. It's a leader in security systems. It's a leader in irrigation and many other high-tech sectors. So I think what you have is a very complex map of overlapping interests and forces in this sub-region where it's all coming to a head. And I think it's important that the Middle East conflicts are not seen as completely separate from what's happening on the other side of the Red Sea in Africa.
Emmanuel, beyond stating its position, what other actions would you expect from the AU and other regional bodies in this matter?
In the reports that the UAE and India and other countries will follow Israel's lead and recognize Somaliland as well. I think this would be a welcome development. Probably, it's been more comfortable for major powers or regional actors to choose caution and not to offend Somaliland or the African Union or the Arab League. But once one country makes the move, in that case Israel, I think it breaks a taboo and more countries will follow suit. I do expect our regional partners to stop being stuck in slogans from the past and realize that it is about time to understand that the region has moved on, following the war between Israel and Iran, that the Iranian regime is a criminal regime shooting at its own citizens for demanding their own freedom. And it is about time simply to complete the victory that is almost achieved against the Iranian Islamic Republic and reshape the region based on realism and principles, and basically release ourselves from the failed slogans from the past.
Steven, your final thoughts?
Well, it's very interesting for scholars of international relations to see how this one is going to play out over the next few months and years. Is Israel's recognition just going to be the sole country that recognizes, or, as Emmanuel says, are other countries going to come on board? I mean, it also brings into attention, I think, the other country that has been struggling for independence and recognition, and that's the Western Sahara. Because when the Spanish decolonized and left, immediately the Moroccans invaded. And Morocco considers Western Sahara as part of its sovereign territory. And actually, very interestingly, in the first Trump administration, Donald Trump was one of the first countries made the USA one of the first countries to recognize Morocco's claim over Western Sahara. So those who study what is a state, how do states interact in the field of international relations will be watching this one very closely.
Dr. Emmanuel, Navon, and Steven Gruzd, thank you so much for sparing the time to speak with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.